Interesting. There's a sweet spot. I think we were in it.
Felt great. I never got dunked, so I don't know how cold it was.
Cold.
Mm-hmm. No, I tell this story because I remember the instructor was very clear on, like, if something happens, just listen to me and don't get out of your seat and try to do hero stuff. And I was like, okay. So 3 people got ejected from the raft, and I'm, like, in the back rudder position, and it's just me and the instructor. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to listen to him, even though, you know, my instinct would be to go grab Cindy, who was, like, in the water.
We did it in elementary school, and I think I'd done it before as a kid. And I remember the first time I fell in, and then you realize if you float on your back with your feet in front of you, you're as good as a boat.
And that's with the life vest anyway, right?
Exactly. So you're as good as a boat, and your feet are shock absorbers, and you just do that.
Yeah. I have the natural floating system where I feel like I can float just by holding my breath.
I don't have that.
But, okay. I don't know if I would totally trust it in, like, a rapids situation.
My neutral buoyancy is like bottom of the pool.
Okay. So 0 natural buoyancy.
Not good.
No, especially in saltwater. It's like you can't sink if you wanted to.
I know some floaty people.
It's a wonderful feeling. One of my favorite places is to go to one of the, like, lagoons in Oahu where they have the seawall, so there are no sea creatures coming over, and the waves are kind of blunted by the seawall, and you can just go out there and 45 minutes just literally just float around like a piece of driftwood and watch people go by boating and stuff. And they think that I'm some Olympic swimmer or something, but I'm not exerting anything at all. I'm just floating around, going like, woo.
Just rolled well on the buoyancy attribute.
Yeah, that was the one thing, yeah. So I theorize that I come from, like, mer people if you go far back enough. Fish people. That being said, people like Michael Phelps or whatever who have, like, size 20 shoes and for flippers, can really propel themselves around, seem to be the most suited.
I was just reading somewhere that if you look at how hard he trains, it puts a lot of that Bigfoot thing to bed.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's just all
he
effort.
Outworked everybody, like every other champion.
I mean,
the feet didn't hurt.
Genetics play some factor,
but not larger than the people who don't stop.
Okay.
Who train like 7 days a week when everybody else isn't.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's sort of a universal rule, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unless you're trying to wrestle Andre the Giant or something, skill can only take you so far.
Yeah, I mean, like overtraining's a thing. That's real. You can get weaker. You can get slower.
Mm. You mean if you're injuring yourself?
No, I mean if you're not training with some thinking, you can get slower. If you run every day in the wrong way, you can get slower. Right? You need to rest and recover in order to get stronger. If you skip that or don't allow it, you don't get stronger.
So it's not just a matter of training.
It probably looks like a curve, right? It's not a line. It's not like the more the better. It's progressive overload, right? Like, so overload a bit and then rest and then continue. But see that a lot.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
In high school or just in
like,
professional athletes?
It's with like high school lacrosse, you have a template, and yeah, there's teams that like run 2 miles for time every day. There's teams that never do distance running and only do sprinting. There's teams that lift weights. There's teams that don't. You can see it. And there are teams that get slower over the course of the season from the distance running and the sport itself.
I mean, how much of it is that you have like a training season and then you have a competitive season, and the stresses are kind of different?
At this point, I think the competitive season is too long not to be part of the training season too. Right? Like you will be deconditioned if you do.
If you're not training,
3 months of playing lacrosse is going to make you thin. You're going to get smaller and weaker if you're not counteracting it consciously by eating a lot, lifting heavy sometimes, and getting some rest in there. So days off are actually important. Otherwise, though, it's just like it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like what you do with the time you have is the instructions in. What the kid eats is the fuel with which the body can execute those instructions, and sleep is when it happens. So if they don't sleep, forget it. If they don't eat, forget it. And if your instructions aren't smart, forget it.
It sounds almost like sumo wrestling training, where you're like your caloric intake needs to be up there.
I think for anything physical, if you want to get at really competitive levels, yes, that's all considered now. And it's shocking when you think when we were kids that like professional athletes would drink. I don't think they're able to do that anymore.
There are no Babe Ruths of lacrosse who are just pounding hot dogs and beers all day.
I think of like English soccer. They were in the pubs after games until like 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Really. And I think Cristiano Ronaldo like sparked a bit of a revolution in people thinking about
Like
24 hours a day instead of just training.
Mm-hmm. Although those old days were more fun, probably.
Oh, they were probably better at it. Completely mean it.
So what do you think that is? What's the difference in... it goes beyond just being at the bar after the game. Has more to do with, I don't know, people being more like invested in the physical world 20 years ago than they are now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes all the way back to, like, before you pave the roads, people have to have feet that are aware of the height of what they're stepping on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that goes to your brain. So, yeah, we've made things easier and easier and easier. And I think, if you look at track and field records at the high school level, it's fascinating because they're all set in, like, 89, 91, 92.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not frequently set since then.
And this is because people were
They're less athletic. They're spending their time on computers instead of running around playing capture the flag in the woods with their friends. And we saw a steady setting of new records until the mid-90s.
Until the dawn of
Nintendo.
personal
or
computers.
We called it No Friendo. Yeah.
But the hand-eye coordination, that's got to be off the charts.
No. They're just, I actually make fun of it, right? Like if you ask them to twitch their thumbs, they're experts. Their thumbs twitch faster than you could possibly believe. Other movements aren't that sophisticated at all. So I'm not sure how much that one pathway, that one movement, matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they have better touch in their fingertips from it? No. They can just text quick.
Right. They can do the devices, but we haven't developed the sport yet where the rapid thumb twitch is...
No, instead they're spreading pickleball so that you don't need to be in your body.
And so your take on pickleball is that it's a watered-down tennis.
Communism.
Pickleball is communism.
Yeah.
Please elaborate.
It's equity, anti-competitive, and it's funded everywhere and being pushed everywhere, and everybody's talking about it all of a sudden.
In what way is it anti-competitive?
Oh, it takes athleticism out of it. There's an actual rule set so that you can't volley, and they call it the kitchen. I don't care enough to learn it in specifics, but it's anti-competitive, meaning like athleticism is taken out. So old people can play young people and like not lose.
So it's considered more of an quote unquote inclusive sport because it requires less.
I think the literal word is equity.
Mm-hmm. So it's a more equitable sport.
Mm-hmm. Everyone can play it without losing.
Right. I mean, we may as well play like the table football game where you flick the paper triangle.
I even noticed, like I had a team that ping pong used to be their favorite activity other than the sport, and now it's hacky sack, and that's also fairly communal in its outlook.
I think hacky sack is more of an artistic endeavor than like an athletic.
It's a hang.
Right.
A hack is a hang. But they're mellower.
And so you're saying that schools or the pickleball interests are
I just don't trust it.
Pushing
it's
it?
It's new, it's everywhere, everyone loves it.
Do they even have like boys and girls teams for pickleball,
No.
or is it just an everybody thing?
Age, gender, all of it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that sounds like the sport of the future. Speaking of the future, welcome to AI Affected, which is a podcast about artificial intelligence and its effects on our life and work and well-being. Very happy to be here with today's guest. He's a former lacrosse coach at USC. He is known as an offensive wunderkind in the Marmani League in California, where his teams hold the all-time scoring record. He speaks 4 languages that I'm aware of, maybe more. He's a classically trained actor and a master of kinesthetics and physical movement, and one of my favorite human beings. Welcome, Coach Peter SWANDER.
Hi, Russ.
How you doing?
I'm okay, having
Yeah.
been lured out of my lair.
I know. There are a few people that could get you here, so I
might be
appreciate
the
it.
only one.
Well,
You know to ask when I'm too busy to think about it, and I'll just say yes to get off the phone.
yeah,
It'll work.
the lacrosse season ends, and there's a window there.
Yeah, now I gotta do all the things I promised to do.
There's a window there. We can talk about the things that I'm sure we will talk about, which is like, what we've been talking about, like technology's effect on young people or the pandemic's effect on young people. As a small zoo operates in the background. But I wanted to ask you about Guildhall first. If this is something
Yes,
that you're
darling,
willing to go
Guildhall.
into. So you're, like when we say that you're a classically trained actor,
I went to drama school in London.
you went to one of the top drama schools in the world.
I don't know if that's still a thing, but yeah.
It was at the time, was it not?
a thing, yeah.
How can you talk about the rigorous nature of the training at Guildhall, and does it offer anything that's applicable outside of classical acting to you now that you are in competitive sports?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's so foundational to every minute of my life since that, I could never discard it or no, of course. But it all sort of falls into the same thing of like what that training was really getting in your consciousness and your body to be in the same place at the same time. And if you're a talented actor, then your imagination and your body in the same place at the same time. And, it was 14-hour days, 5 days a week, with mandatory drinking in the pub for 3 years.
So when you say keeping your consciousness and your body in the place at the same time, does that goes beyond just daydreaming or being distracted?
Well, it's sort of like, okay, there's be present, but how much of you is present? Like, how are your hands, how are your feet? Can you think with your hands and your feet? How's your breathing? Like your whole self can your whole self be present? And the really great actors on stage, that's what that is there's a very large consciousness present. Much more than someone in their ordinary life.
And you'd argue that they have more kind of intricate control over their extremities than the average person.
Sure. I mean, you look at like Peter Sellers could make an object act. He could hold a microphone and it would fight him. Right. That skill can go very, very far. People like Tom Hardy who change shape. He's doing it with both his mind, his breath, and his body all at the same time, and he's worked on it for forever.
And so, how has this training affected your coaching?
It's really simple. People want presence. They're not present because of devices, because of modern life. They want to be present, and they want to be present with other people. And so the classical acting is being present to an audience and to a text all in the same space. And so just being present with kids, people want that organically, right? And I think there's less and less of it. So it's, to me, becoming more and more important.
Is this, without kind of asking for it, is this feedback that you ever get from parents that kids are like, oh, my kid is so much more aware of his surroundings beyond the lacrosse, successes and failures and things?
I actually try to keep a bigger boundary than that so that I don't really know what the parents think. It's one of those lucky things where the activity itself has huge demands and is hugely rewarding, and so the progress that's needed to do well in the activity, it shows in the kid. Like, you have to be present to do well in lacrosse. It happens too fast. You can't think about it and then do it, or do it and then think about it. It's just got to be thinking with hands and feet.
It sounds like part of what you're talking about is getting into a flow state.
There's lots of different people doing similar. It's called rewilding by some people. It's just that, like, you as a human animal have more capacities than your current circumstances demand. So if you want to learn about those capacities, you need to put yourself in circumstances that demand them consistently. And then, yeah, sure.
Rewilding, that sounds like something out of the main character in Brave New World or something like that.
No, there's like Irwin, I don't know all these guys' names, but like Irwin LaCour, I think, is one, and Ido Portal, like the people who've been interested in movement, right? Like, look, I studied in Russia in movement, and the first thing you did was learn to crawl. It's the same thing you do in Alexander technique. We did a lot of that, and there's people doing it now. There's sort of organic things we evolved to be able to do and to use that aren't called for. We walk on flat ground on soft, comfortable shoes and sit in chairs and stare at screens with one focal depth. And you're used to be evaluating decisions through trees at a distance that had life or death consequences.
And so how do you duplicate that in a modern setting?
Well, the closest I can get is the lacrosse ball moves around 100 miles an hour, and the privilege as a coach is I get to wear no helmet, stand in the middle of that chaos, and try not to get hit. So yeah, that's probably the secret reason of doing it, is you don't see things move like that anywhere else that I can find.
Demonstrating it by putting your life on
No,
the line.
I'll go stand in the middle of the offense so I can see what's going on. And it's a little fun. You push it a little bit sometimes because the ball's coming by you, and so are people. but like I know what I'm doing. I don't get hit. But really, just having your eyes have to track all that movement and make coherent sense of it is a challenging skill that becomes a really fun capacity.
In terms of
I'm harder to sneak up on than I was before I coached.
even with all of your other
even with
trainings.
martial arts and acting and all that, but like the speed and violence of lacrosse, it makes you remind martial artists that athleticism matters. There's a lot of great things in it.
Was there a name of the school of kinesthetics that you trained in when you were training with the Russian teachers?
Andre Drosnin is his name.
Mm-hmm.
It was at the Vakhtangov school, but Andre Drosnin's his own. He's written some books since then. You could buy them on Amazon.
How did you discover it such that you found yourself there?
I went to the Moscow Art Theater School when I was a junior in college. There's been a program there since. It worked with, I think, ART and Harvard. I think John Bernthal went. Like, there have been people who've gone through this program. And the guy in charge of movement for the Moscow Art Theater was Andre Drosnin. And it just clicked with me. I had never done anything like that. And and so I went back after college.
So this was before Guildhall?
Yeah, this is before Guildhall.
Got it. Did you feel like walking into Guildhall that you had a secret, special set of skills?
I had a different skill set. I had a physically based approach, and English theater is text-based, so it's completely different. And they're all aiming at the same place, but the way you approach it is different. They said like a blind man and a deaf man should have the same experience in an ideal theater. I think that's Brecht said that. And the Russians, the deaf man is having a great time no matter what. The English, the blind man is having a great time no matter what. And it's only when it really works that both guys have the same experience, but the approaches are different. Does that make sense?
It does. I once did an improv show for a deaf audience that was brought in by like a hearing impaired foundation or whatever, and this was with a very, very physically oriented improv team that we played with, and the way that we played in front of the audience was even more extreme than in a typical show, which was very physical. We're climbing on each other, but the cleverness really had to go because there was only so much lip reading that was going to be successful from the audience, and everything else was physical gags and the look on your face and the kind of obvious dynamics that people could see.
When it gets to the same place, you get Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau.
Mm-hmm.
Turn off the sound, it's hilarious. Close your eyes, it's hilarious. It's the same hilarious either way.
So when you went back after Guildhall,
Went back, sorry.
to the Russian, was this Moscow Arts Theater or was this?
That was before Guildhall, but yeah.
But you said didn't you say you went back after? Or
No, I went back to Russia after college. I went my junior year and then went right back after senior year.
Mm-hmm. And more of the same kind of intense.
No, it was different. I was
training?
focusing just on movement, and they call it scenicheskoye движение. And so it's a lot. I found out years later that Stanislavski had gotten a lot of that from Hatha yoga, and it was just the Soviet Union had suppressed the parts where they talked about it being yoga. So it was very similar to yoga or gymnastics, just with a little bit more expressive and bent, a little more like circus.
Was there any kind of Grotowski school of thought?
Oh, yeah. Like, so that overlaps. Grotowski knew Drosnin. Grotowski's for people who want to really go into the woods and be a monk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of which, so I've been obsessed with Andre Gregory's memoir, which just came out called This Is Not a Memoir, and he talks extensively about his interactions with Grotowski, studying with him, and how his whole career arc was based on going to Europe and seeing, I think at the Edinburgh Festival, he bought a ticket for 12 nights in a row for a Grotowski play that was playing there, and he went every night. And I don't remember the name of the play, but it was something religious in nature where one of the actors was playing Jesus as he died, and somehow there was a way in which the death scene happened that was like incredibly captivating because, as Grotowski explained later, the actor was able to display one of each 12 signs of the cross, like as he's slowly falling down into death, and each one was developed over years. So they had these like unbelievably physical control of what they were doing.
The guy who did that's really famous, and I'm going to get his name pronounced wrong.
Please.
It's Richard Cieslak, and he was their main actor.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, his physical virtuosity was incredible.
And I mean, for Gregory, it was like they watched a Grotowski play and thought that they should quit immediately because it was just this unrecreatable thing that was a marvel.
I mean, I explain it to kids the same way it was explained to me, right? Like, if you want to understand what commitment is, perform a dive roll over a table that's big enough that you can't think about the landing, only the jumping, only the takeoff. And, that's like a graduating exercise because you have to be able to commit to the jump. Mm-hmm. You'll figure out the landing later. So that's what I mean when I say, like, the physical things demand inner qualities. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to do that.
Is there a direct parallel in lacrosse to this kind of leap?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You have to dodge or beat your man. Like, that's all you're trying to do in the whole world. And then the second you've done that, you probably need to start doing something else immediately, starting to look for a pass. Mm-hmm. But it's called dodging to score or dodging to pass. You have to dodge to score in order to throw a pass. So if you're not present in the moment, really executing the actions authentically, it's the same as a text. It's the same as a play. It's just that you're improvising the way you do it. You have a set physical goal. But yeah, like, the actions in lacrosse have to be with intent.
Do have any of your players ever done drama, or is that like not an overlap?
Oh, sure.
That happens?
There've been like 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. It's not something. I mean, I make them all do public speaking all the time, and I'll give them like the prompt, the first line of a speech, and then leave them with the whole group. It's funny. It takes a little while, but they get good at it. Mm-hmm. So no, like, it's not like we talk about theater when we're coaching lacrosse. We just do lacrosse.
But when they
informs it.
When they try to do public speaking, do they find like latent skills in their training?
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious. Some people are so good at it you would not expect, and vice versa. And it's just sort of a fun thing to find out who's gonna surprise you and say something heartfelt and brilliant when the team needed it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you, this is a kind of a separate philosophy of yours that it goes beyond the athletics, that they need to be able to inspire each other, and they need to the camaraderie is kind of something that you work on as well.
I learned a motto at a summer camp where I learned lacrosse, which was the other fellow first, and it works because it's easy to do things for someone else at times when your own courage or energy might fail you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can jump in front of a shot to save the goalie from having to deal with it. Yeah.
And so that philosophy kind of permeates.
It's the same in theater or improv, right? If you're not like acutely aware of your partner and present to them, it's probably not going very well.
Yes, that's something that took me a long time to learn, because in improv, as well in stand-up, a lot of the instinct is just like, hey, finally I get to showcase my talents whenever it's my scene or whatever. Yeah. But really, like,
the wrong direction.
Yeah, you're out there with a scene partner. You're there to gift them and make them look good and support them, and in that process be successful.
I had an actor teach a lesson in Russia where he picked up a glass of water and did a scene with it 2 different ways. And he just said, whatever my partner needs, I take, or whatever my partner does, I take what I need. So if I need to hate this glass of water, everything about it makes me hate it. And if I need to love this glass of water, then everything, the same details, the same glint, the same things, make me love it. So there's no excuse for a bad partner or any of that. Same things there in sports. When you understand the guy covering you as your partner, and whatever he does, you take what you need, and that's when you started to master that part of sports. It's the same as dance or theater.
That's interesting. That's
hard to get kids to realize that guy is not your enemy but your friend, and when he does something, he's telling you what to do.
Do you feel like via that philosophy that your team respects the opponents more than average?
No, it's not respects, it's is interested in the opponents. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, their slap check invites my split dodge. It's just rock, paper, scissors. But those are the signals we're looking for.
So you feel like they're looking more intently and reading the opponent than...
Well, it's probably all my fault. I started with chess, then fencing, and then lacrosse. And so in fencing, you don't just rush in blindly or you'll lose immediately. You have to understand who it is and what kind of defense they're going to be putting up, as well as what kind of offense. Mm-hmm. I think they're the same word in 2 different languages, offense and defense. I think French, I think it's défense, like of fencing, and of fencing is offense.
Oh, and they both derived from fencing, yeah.
Yeah, about swords, basically. So if you don't sound them out, you don't know what's going on. So, yeah, we try to take our cues from what they're doing.
There's a lot of clearly, there's a lot of interdisciplinary stuff going on in your background. Like, very few people are into chess and fencing and acting and sports.
Well, you have to not be comfortable at rest, I think, to need activities that bad, is the truth. But it's also, there's some activities that will support any amount of things you bring to them. Mm-hmm. Shakespeare's one. I don't care. If you bring enough energy and thought to Shakespeare, it'll support it. It'll support any choice you make. It'll carry you right through the performance. Lacrosse is the same way. You put enough energy into that, it gives you a huge energy back. If you don't put enough energy into it, you're at physical risk. Mm-hmm. So yeah, these things require a lot of energy.
I wanted to ask questions about chess. Do you use chess openings in lacrosse?
Yes. I don't talk about it with anybody, but I think you want to play a consistent opening pattern all the time that you're an expert at, so you can diagnose the other guy's level of expertise at the things that are contained within that structure. It's the same reason it happens in chess.
I suppose if you're playing openings, then you're kind of putting the opponent in the position of having to defend your opening rather than doing what they want to execute on the field.
I just think it gives you a stable data set of things to read, right? Like, okay, this team is playing our cuts very tightly. Oh, this team is splitting the difference between our cuts to the middle and their men on the backside. Like, you can see what they're doing by their response to your opening pattern. Mm-hmm. And with the shot clock in college, more and more teams are ending up playing a pattern because they only have 80 seconds.
So I know that part of the time when you talk about how you're developing strategy, a lot of it is encouraging independent movement and activity among the players, right? Like, everyone has to know just how to be a free-flowing entity within the team. So how do you square that with, but we're also running a set opening where certain things have to be happening?
If people understand the fundamentals, because it's just, there's only 6 pieces of this on either offense or defense. We put 7 with the goalie, but 6 on offense. It's not that many. It isn't. And so they have to learn the relationship to their defender, their relationship to their immediately adjacent teammates, and their inside or through teammates. But there's only sort of 4 possibilities. Somebody can be inside, they can be all the way through on the other side, or they can be in front of you or behind you. And once they learn how to relate to things either in front or behind them, inside of them or through to them, then they can start to do that while they move around and those relationships change. I can't track the math on what 6 people relating to each other at speed are like that, but it doesn't matter. It's an emergent property. Each kid is really reading one relationship at a time, and then it's changing and it's shifting quickly. So, yeah, it's like anything. You're training. It's like a boxer. You train him to fight and you let him go. If you tried to coach a boxer through a match, you probably aren't going to do very well.
To push the chess analogy too far, perhaps, do you think games have an opening and a middle game and an end game, or is it more just you've got your set strategy and it evolves?
That makes me think more of fencing than chess, right? And and that the opening you're getting to know them and trying out different things and checking their preparation. Are they ready for a 10-man ride? Are they ready for the things you've done? Are you ready for them? The middle game is people leaning into whatever advantages they have. And the end game is as soon as the time starts to become a factor where, they might not have enough time to come back, then that starts, whether somebody's killing the game or playing far away to make a losing team press out or whatever that is. Mm-hmm. That's going to emerge from the middle. So beginning, middle, and end, same everywhere. The pieces don't leave the board.
Right. Thankfully, right? Nobody's getting knocked out.
Or if they do, they get replaced. Right. But that, and then the good thing about chess is there's no deception in it, so it teaches you how to think cleanly. The bad thing about chess is the whole real world is based on deception, and it's useless in a fight.
And there's a fair amount of deception in lacrosse.
It's all deception. Mm-hmm. But I think that's true with all of sports, and I'll make the kids watch Michael Jordan to understand that everything he's doing is to tell the defense the opposite of what's really about to happen, and that's a consistent thing in his late career. That's what we're looking for. But it's rock, paper, scissors, where I hold out a rock and I have a scissors behind my back, or I hold out a piece of paper and I have a rock behind my back. So when you get your scissors out, I'm going to hit you in the head with the rock, which was the plan the whole time.
I want to shift gears for a second.
To AI.
Not even yet. Not even yet. I'm too interested in other things first. You turned me on to a somewhat obscure psychoanalyst who wrote things in the late 60s. The the father of transactional analysis, Eric Berne, who I've been telling stories about for years after reading a couple of his books, and his view on the human psyche and how we filter the world, how we have conversations with other people, how we all have voices inside our heads that have different perspectives, and he kind of defines all of that and gives them all names. How did you come by transactional analysis?
I think just in the course of reading voraciously. But it was What Do You Say After You Say Hello? His script analysis book was the first one I read, and then I went back and read his earlier, more foundational ones. And
like Games People Play was like the
bestseller,
bestseller, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I really think Startling Insights, absolutely unpalatable to the public, the medical establishment, and probably most useful for writers and artists.
Well, part of the reason that it was unpalatable to the medical establishment is because he, unlike every other psychoanalyst, was just like, yes, I will cure people. I don't expect them to be in therapy forever. They just need this tool set, and then I send them on their way, and they're fine. And that was also like weirdly revolutionary for somebody to say who wants a business and being a therapist.
I mean, I think reading's important. Like, there's not much that's happening that isn't just from some book you could have read.
Fair enough. Does this tool set of the like parent voice, adult voice, child voice stuff ever come into play?
I mean, I don't think about it, but when you ask me the question, I can absolutely understand every interaction we're having that way, and you're trying to get adult to adult communication effectively, and then at the same time coaching, you're going to be parenting like your adult ego state talking to their child ego state at least some of the time.
Does this stuff ever manifest in game?
Oh yeah. Like, there's kids who you can see their mood change, and maybe spare them what's coming, get them off the field, and calm them down, or whatever. And it's a different ego state has taken over that person.
Mm-hmm. And so, Byrne talks about these things called crossed transactions, where it's like the wrong ego state is talking to the incompatible other ego state, and that's when people start arguing.
If a kid is in his adult ego state, really, and I come at him like in my parental adult state, that's not going to go well. They're not going to like you, and it's going to degrade your relationship over time.
And I guess, especially from a coaching perspective, it seems like the draw would be to be in the parental ego state because you're teaching, but you probably want to be in the adult ego state as much as possible.
I went from being a nerd to a performer, so I kind of think for communication that these are better ways of thinking about it. Like, effective communication builds relationships. Ineffective communication hurts relationships. Communication is only what is received. If you dwell on those two things, you'll be fine. And it is that simple. And I think that's Jocko Willink's influence there. Mm-hmm. But genuinely, like, that's a lot more productive than trying to map out complicated things like people's scripts.
So when you say communication is only what's received, that means you might have a bunch of meaning and things that you want.
I only care what got across. That's the sum total of it. And you have to be able to detach from, being attached to what it is you're trying to communicate and read what's actually received or not. Which is why you can sometimes just a look is enough if it's effective.
Mm-hmm. Is this kind of thing something that you can convey? Oh yeah, no, that's easy. The student leaders have to read Jocko Willink type books on leadership and start to think about it. And then we also and you have
the high school kids coach youth kids, so they are thinking about communicating and leading like consciously, and I am sharing consciously what I'm doing with them all the time. We try to make everything overt. We've defined it. Like, leadership is the art of inspiring people, a group of people, towards uncommon efforts and an uncommon goal, was one definition. And so we're talking all the time about how do we all come with? How do you bring everybody with you? Like, how are things going?
That seems somewhat unusual.
No.
For a lacrosse team to have this kind of like extensive reading list about leadership.
I've learned just to have nothing. I have tons of respect for the people who coach effectively, and I'm always finding out they do a lot more interesting things than maybe you would suspect.
Okay. Speaking of interdisciplinary coaches, I think you mentioned that John Wooden was one of your inspiring coach leader types.
I just don't know how I hadn't heard of him until I was actually coaching, and then when I, learned and looked at the pyramid, I will still look at the pyramid at the end of every season to diagnose what just happened, and it's a perfectly accurate lens for how it works.
Can you explain the pyramid a bit?
Yeah, he has a pyramid of success, and it's a bunch of values arranged in a pyramid, and the foundation being the bottom, and if all of those, I think it's 5 qualities are there, then the next 4 emerge, and then the next 3 emerge, 2, 1. And he's got a lot of little notes on it, but it's basically an exact map. And I believe the 2 pillars, or the corners, are industriousness and enthusiasm.
What is the base of the pyramid?
Industrious in one corner, enthusiasm in the other. This is asking me off the top of my head, and I want to say it's friendship, cooperation, and loyalty, but I could be wrong.
So industriousness at the bottom means that hard work
Without
is
hard
kind of
work,
the basis
nothing else is happening.
Yeah.
And without enthusiasm, nothing else is happening. And without cooperation, in the literal, break it down, cooperate, it's a team sport. And he was a basketball coach, so it's perfect for lacrosse.
And you run quasi-basketball plays.
Basketball was invented by a lacrosse player. Fact. So
Naismith?
Yep. It's what it is it's what do you do when you can't play lacrosse outside? Well, he invented the hoop thing. And there's one less guy. So everything in basketball is exactly the same as lacrosse. We just have an extra person with a little more room behind the goal. But basketball used to have a jump ball after every basket. That's the face-off in lacrosse. Right? You can see the evolution of rule changes in basketball, and it's probably coming to lacrosse, which is, in my opinion, sad, but there it is. They have 2-point lines in the pro.
Oh, meaning that if you hit a long-distance shot, then you get a...
Yeah, there's been a whole evolution of rules in basketball, right? 3-point line, no zone, paint rules, all that stuff.
So basketball has been accused of this kind of offensive inflation because it's probably what people enjoy watching more. So they've disallowed things like hand checking, and there's the illegal defense, and there are various things that you can't do to impede people. Is there a parallel for that in the evolution of lacrosse rules? Yeah,
there's also a fun answer. So the first book you can find on lacrosse, I think it's 1856 by a guy named De Beers. And his first paragraph is, thank goodness, at last this period of controversy is over, and they've changed the rules back to where the pocket of the stick is very shallow, so we won't have all this violence. So it's funny because the pockets of sticks in lacrosse are currently very deep, and the game is extremely violent, and the rules committees are looking at, should we change it again? So these things come in cycles, right? And the NBA is just going the way of all offense, no defense, and then people will stop watching, and it'll change.
And you're saying that the violence is caused by it being harder to dislodge the ball because the pocket is deep.
Yes, in lacrosse. In basketball, I'm assuming it's just officiating.
Yeah, it's officiating, and it's, any way that you're impeding these offensive players is a foul.
The officials are the ones doing that.
Right.
And they've been told to do it, so they do it.
Right.
Yeah, lacrosse used to have big hits, and now it doesn't. Those are always flagged. And then the funny one to me is a thing called a cross-check used to be called every single time it appeared. And then the pockets got deeper, the ball became harder to dislodge, and now cross-checks are not called and are how we teach people to play defense, even though it's technically not allowed.
So you're saying that big hits used to be a thing and now they're not, and yet the game is more violent now.
Yes. Yeah, because the ball does not come out without a pretty significant contact with the stick or the person, whereas when I was in high school, the ball would come out on a slight touch. So it's gone from a 50-50 guess as to can you keep the ball when defended by one person to 95% of the time it's easy to keep the ball against one person.
As an old school coach, my assumption would be that you would think it's because stick skills have degraded, so that's why they had to make the pocket deeper or something like that.
No, it was actually the opposite. It was a corporation invented a product and then defended it legally. And that product made it easier to climb the skill curve and change the sport so that the skills are the same, if not better, but the length of time it takes to master it is much shorter because of this equipment.
I do want to shift and talk about AI a little bit. So, just for context, I've talked to almost exclusively artists in this podcast about AI. And rarely are we talking about the technical merits or back end of a large language model. Usually the angle that we talk about is how these things affect the lives of people and society and how it's shaping everything that we do. And, I would think that a lacrosse coach would be as immune to the effects of like encroaching AI as anyone in any industry, because you're dealing with human beings and you're teaching them all of these, kind of leadership skills. But like, do you see this impinging on the sport or on, your profession in a meaningful way?
Sure. I guess I'd start with saying anything you measure will improve is a really important, true principle. However, once you've measured it, it's measured and is no longer a mystery, and you can no longer imagine things about it. So, in the context of sports, if we measure someone's top speed in miles per hour in a 10-yard running fly, they will get obsessed with improving that number, and it will increase. They lose the capacity to imagine themselves as faster or athletic than maybe they are, and maybe that capacity to imagine that is more important than people think. The more things you measure, the less capacity for imagination there is. This is Tolstoy. In the mind of God, you have no free will, because your next moment is inevitably predetermined. But it is your ignorance that gives you the freedom and free will. I think we're going to be facing this in increasing ways, like on every level, and certainly in sports. You could easily take one of these cameras with an AI program. It could watch my entire season of games in 10 seconds and then recommend, strategies. Who's the hot player? Whose percentages are currently better? Anything I could think could be algorithm and then, put there and used to measure. But that kind of omniscient knowledge is total, what's the word? I mean, I don't want to say slavery, but it's total, there is no freedom if everything is measured.
Sure. And I mean, you could see that again, to use basketball as an example, where the analytics movement has taken over in the past 10, 15 years, and now most teams are designing their teams to chuck a bunch of three-pointers because that's considered to be the most efficient spot, or layups. These are the two high-efficiency positions on the court. But it doesn't always produce the best basketball.
I mean, my high school motto is that John Yates' ode on a Grecian urn, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all you need to know. That's certainly true in sports, and it's enough for me. Like, when we're playing simply and truthfully, it's beautiful.
So is it the case that you kind of look forward to the onset of the entire league adopting these kind of analytic and studying AI things so that your team can defy it and be better magically somehow?
I saw some Middle Ages or medieval time quote recently that was talking about how that's just a never-ending cycle. It's rock, paper, scissors is a universal kids game for a reason, right? Rock is not better than paper nor scissors, no matter how good, whatever. It doesn't matter. So that's always going to be happening, right? Like sagacity has to outwit the defense was some of this fencing manual I was reading.
Mm-hmm. So you're just saying no matter how accurately you can measure something.
Smart, watching back, thinking about it too, right? And that's what just isn't not going to be there, right? So the new analytics come from those new rules like three-point lines, and then they'll invent another rule and new analytics will be needed, or participation will go down, they'll lose market share, and they'll get worried. I mean, look, the three-pointer is an exact thing, analog, because it's not there in lacrosse, and it is there at the pro level in lacrosse. And to me, you can see what a pretty game basketball must have been before the three-pointer, where the entire thing is, you better get close to it.
Right.
And we're going to need to do whatever we need to do to get dunks, to get inside looks that aren't risks. And the second you reward distance, you really change the logic of the game.
So other than the analytics revolution, I can imagine a history teacher at your school saying, well, my kids are writing their papers with ChatGPT, and how am I to discern the difference between what they write and just having something generated for them? Is there any parallel for a lacrosse team where they can, I don't know, fudge a book report on leadership because they use ChatGPT or something like that, other than the analytics side of it?
Okay, I would think it would bother baseball more, right? Like if you treat lacrosse like it's baseball and get a perfect shot, or what you think is a perfect shot, that's not going to translate to games necessarily very well at all. It could, but not necessarily. Running at cones is running at cones. Shooting on empty nets is shooting on empty nets. It's back to that medieval thought. There's an intelligence there trying to stop you from doing all of that. That's the game. So I think things like analytics on film for people's form and technique. Like you could see that applying to baseball, where it's an individual sport pretending to be a team sport, or golf.
Yeah.
Like completely, or a tennis serve, or anything that's like isolated like that. But every skill in basketball, lacrosse, and ice hockey and soccer is also a decision. So training in isolation from opposition isn't as useful, I think, as people might think.
Can you go a little bit more in depth into the intelligence that tries to stop you from doing what you're trying to do?
Sure. If I want to dodge, I'll show you pass. Okay, how many times have I done that before? If you're defending me, have you figured it out yet? Do you know that my second intention is the one you should be worried about? Have I figured out that you figured that out, and I should now lie by telling the truth and do the first thing right away? Rock, paper, scissors is the right model because that's really how it works. It's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Or thing, counter to the thing, counter to the counter. To continue to iterate past that is meaningless. You're back to an original, like the thing. Right?
Okay.
So any human conflict is basically a rock, paper, scissors dynamic. Someone has an idea, someone has to stop that idea, and there's a counter to.
Okay, so to take another sport seemingly unrelated to lacrosse, poker. A lot of modern poker is, well, it's kind of knowing what the most efficient move in any given situation is, and this can be AI aided because people are just kind of studying.
They now know the answer for free.
Yeah,
they don't
pretty
have to
much.
do the mental work of the math.
And then kind of the other side of it is knowing the history of certain players, so you kind of know what their style is, how often they bluff, how often they play a certain hand a certain way. Do you think that kind of knowledge, because that seems like a level of analytics far and above what exists in lacrosse right now, like knowing the profiles of certain players and knowing what kind of fakes they throw or what their tendencies are?
You know, I mean, I'm a victim of this. Like, the really good coaches who've known for a long time, they have my number completely, like strategically. So, yeah, the players is one thing, but they know we're going to try and go fast. They know that if they cover that they're going to be in good shape if they're disciplined in their slowed down offense, and they beat us that way every time. So yeah, like, I don't know if that answers your question, but you can definitely be outthought.
What do you think about a world in which AI is aiding that process to kind of quickly process all these things?
So the first benefit I can think of for a coach would be it can tell you your accurate shooting percentages right now. So if you had the ability, like at Division I, they probably do, to have an iPad handed you with an AI updating the statistics so that you know that, like, player A, his shooting percentage is starting to go below his average, it's now time for player B to take a shot. We're intuiting those sorts of things, but that could be made explicit and would be effective immediately. You want your highest percentage shooter shooting until it isn't, and if he does it all day, it won't be. The shooting percentage will go down as the other team starts to defend it. So monitoring the hot hand would be something a computer could help with a lot.
Interesting. I know that a lot of statisticians, and this is more my basketball knowledge, a lot of statisticians will tell you that, like, there's no such thing as a hot streak. So if a player hits 4 3-pointers in a row, it's not any more likely that the fifth one's going to go in. It'll just go according to whatever their typical 3-point shooting percentage is. Do you agree with that, or do you not?
I mean, like, basketball has so many reps, and it's relatively not violent at all compared to the sport that I coach. And I've seen players go on streaks that lasted several days where they simply didn't miss anything. I've seen some crazy streaks. I've seen huge point explosions. That are statistical anomalies. It's not we don't have the sample size that basketball has.
But
close.
You feel like you can recognize it when it's happening, and it is aberrant to the statistical projection.
There are kids are going to win the game, that are going to have the ball at the end of the game, and they're going to win it. And that's not a statistical thing. That's much more Eric Byrne. That's that kid. His script is being the hero, and the time is now, and he's happy to do it, and his teammates are going to let him. Right?
Wow.
Like, sports is played by people. So the computers can help, I think, but again, there's the kid who grew up getting ready to win the game in overtime, and the parental scripts and all that psychology stuff is saying that's who you are and what's going to happen, and then it does.
To take the opposite tack of the AI and analytics stuff, how much of the magical and esoteric are you observing, in the course of a game that you can look at and go, nobody could have predicted this kind of thing?
I mean, I just wouldn't use the word magic or esoteric. I mean, it's the emergent property of so many different things, right? Like, a lacrosse season is 35 people's lives, plus the lives of all their families for 1 year. There is no one cause for anything. Like, nobody loses or wins a game. It's a team sport from beginning to end in a very profound way. You want to say that again? I'll try and answer again.
Yeah, I don't even know exactly what I was aiming at, other than if there's this sort of uber analytics approach where you try
magic or esoteric.
Yeah.
Yes, kids are awesome. Like, I get to laugh more than most people because teenagers are hilarious. You see flights of fancy on the field that are gorgeous, but I just think of it as inspiration, or like an artistic achievement. It's nothing magical.
Because, like, so to go back to Grotowski, the phrase was coined of the theater of miracles. Because of all of the intense preparation that the actors went through, they were able to display things that, onlookers thought of as miraculous kind of thing.
So, like, the skill level can get so high that there's kids who can consistently do things that look like accidents. Yeah, I can't get into detail, but we've had several of those that... Like, if a baseball player's talented and becomes a lacrosse player, they exhibit, like, attributes that you don't normally see. They catch things that other people don't. They catch things off the short hop on the ground. I've seen kids at full speed short hop a pass, like just catch it like a fielder, while sprinting. Mm-hmm. Like, that kid played baseball.
Yeah, short hopping is a baseball skill. Any kind of... When you said that you can't go into, like, the applications of it, for some reason what popped into my head was kind of I don't know exactly what it's called. There's like a form of martial arts called like drunken boxing or something like that, where someone is made to look kind of uncoordinated, but really they're doing something masterful.
Yeah, like, so I when I played lacrosse, acting was how I was scoring. I was pretending to be bad at one thing to do something else. We've had a player who was sort of the best at that, who you can hide the ball in lacrosse. It's pretty rare, but you can do it. You can make people think you have the ball or don't have the ball. And one kid once threw a pass fake, and he was such a good actor and so relaxed and so committed to it that he asked his defender, "Where's the ball?" It was in his hand, and he's completely relaxed, asking the guy verbally, "Where's the ball?" And when the guy looked, he went right by him and scored. Like, well, yeah, it's a sport that... I mean, look, it's a Native American, it's an Iroquois initiation game to create an Iroquois fighting man, brave. It was kept by the settlers, I think, because they like those qualities. And deception, deceit, trickery, cunning are a big part of our sport.
Speaking of which, so you've gone like fairly deep into the Iroquois history and lore of the game, to the point where you're like inviting celebrity Iroquois players to like play with your teams and stuff like that and train with them, right?
I mean, it's their sport, and I was just lucky enough to meet the Thompson brothers and cousin and some friends of mine. We set up a camp with them, and this was in 2015. They still do this all over the place, and upstate New York and the Iroquois continue to be. I mean, the World Games are in a few weeks down in San Diego, and the Iroquois field a team, the Haudenosaunee, they're now referred to. I'm excited to go watch. Yeah, they do it differently. They're not playing to win. They're playing for a profound religious reason.
And how would you describe that manifesting?
The best player, I think, who ever played, a guy named Lyle Thompson, my favorite quote of his is, "I have never been unhappy on a lacrosse field." And he meant it. Completely different than a Michael Jordan. Equivalent level, and that's how different the mindset is.
Yes, Michael Jordan has been incredibly unhappy on a basketball court.
Right, and like that's part of that process, yeah. And
so is it more of a spiritual
it's very
activity?
Simple. They're playing so that the creator can watch, as well as all of their ancestors. Put yourself in that mindset best you can, and yeah, it would change the way you play.
Well, I don't know if the creator was watching today, but I appreciate everyone who was, and thank you so much, Peter, for being on the podcast today. And that's AI Affected. You did it. That's
okay.
it. We did it. It's done.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a pleasure. And as he now goes back into his mind and thinks like, what did I say? What did I talk about? Yeah.
It's the difference between free flow and bound flow, right? And improv is free flow.
Yeah.
Where you're not interrupting your impulses.
Right, and then it
I've
ends.
learned adult life is bound flow, where you have to be aware of each impulse and make sure you want to say that or think it.
Yes, well, you'll have plenty of time to Monday morning quarterback all the stories that you've told, but I thought that was awesome. So well done.
I guess it's like, look, it's the same here, right? Like things will generally support what you bring to it.